this one of our notices, or just a form that we like to give they're required for our Texas agents to give these to their clients, but it's called the general information and notice to buyers and sellers. All right. um it's 5 pages of information that we're going to go over together. The house or property may be applicable or not applicable. It's just a lot of general information. It's 5 pages, and at the very end of it, you're going to put the broker. It says broker printed name. You're not going to put the broker. You're going to put the brokerage firm. So it's First Class Real Estate Luxury Living. And then you're gonna put you the buyer's agent or seller's agent, the buyer's agent initial. You will sign that as the agent. Then you'll so you put that agent. I'll put myself as the agent, and then you have my buyer as my fake guy James, right? And then you have your buyer seller initial and date there. All right, you're gonna send this to them. Let's go over this form a little bit. So it's very much so general information. Some things we've talked about, but it's funny how some of these things, even though we talked about it, there's a whole form just for it because a lot of people miss out on things. So you want to make sure that you be an informed buyer or seller. The following information may assist you during your real estate transaction. Um, Annexation is the first thing we're going to talk about. If a property is outside of the limits of a municipality, the buyer should be aware that the property may later be annexed by a nearby municipality. Y'all need to drink my coffee. The buyer may find information on the boundaries of nearby municipalities by contacting the municipalities directly. This is very similar to being in the city of Houston as opposed to being in a suburb or being close to the suburb, where the city of Houston may try to annex in that suburb to get the tax money. So just saying things like that may happen. There's no control over it. If you have more questions about that, contact the city officials and ask about that. Next topic we're going to talk about is appraisals. We must all know what an appraisal is. As a real estate agent, you must know what an appraisal is. An appraisal is a value of the property. An appraiser renders an estimated value of a certain an appraisal renders an estimation of value as of a certain date under assumptions and conditions stated in the appraisal report. Typically, a buyer's lender requires an appraisal to verify the loan is secure by the property, that it's worth a certain amount. An appraisal is not the same as an inspection. Generally, the loan lender is going to do this appraisal, and they're not going to loan you more if it doesn't, like if you say the house you're getting a home for $300,000, they do the appraisal and they're saying the home is worth $280. The lender's more than likely not going to loan you if more than it's worth. Okay, so this is getting the property worth. That's an appraisal. Now let's go into brokers. A real estate broker represents a party, a buyer or seller, in a real estate transaction, or may act as an intermediary between the parties. A party may work with the broker or with one of the broker's agents. Both a buyer and seller will be provided a form titled Information About Broker Services, which defines agency relationship. An agent may help seller market a property or help a buyer locate a property. The agent is obligated to negotiate the transaction and may assist in gathering information and may coordinate many details in the transactions. Brokers and agents are not inspectors. If you need to, that's underlined, highlight it. Remember that. You are not an inspector. They do not possess the expertise to conduct inspections and therefore do not make any representations, warranties, or guarantees about a property's condition. And also, agents are not attorneys. Parties are encouraged to seek the assistance of an attorney to help in understanding any legal consequences and provisions of the contract or transaction. Let's get down here. Environmental concerns. General, over the years, the market has identified environmental conditions that buyers should know may exist. Environmental hazards include, but are not limited to, such as asbestos, lead-based paint, mold, pesticides, radon, toxic waste, underground storage tanks, urine, formaldehyde, insulation, and other pollutants. Wetlands, endangered species on other properties may restrict the use of the property. Also, environmental inspection. If the buyer is concerned that environmental hazard, wetlands, or endangered species may be present on the property, the buyer should hire a qualified expert to inspect the property for such. The parties may include promulgated, like only if the buyer is concerned about it, then the party may include a promulgated addendum, TREC 1917, in the contract that may address such matters. Next thing, lead-based paint. If the property was built before 1978, federal law requires that the seller provide a buyer with the pamphlet, protect your family from protect your family from lead in your home. That's the TR 2511. The records of the report that the seller has concerning lead-based paint or hazard, and any opportunity to have the property inspected for lead-based paint or hazard. Sorry, my computer, TV. Mold is not common. Mold. It is not uncommon to find mold spores in a property. The concern about mold increases when there are large amounts of mold found in the property. The Texas Department of Insurance publishes a document titled "Protect Your Home from Mold," TXR 2507, which discusses mold in more detail. Oak wilt and diseased trees. There are diseases such as oak wilt and other conditions that may affect trees and other plants. Oak wilt is a fungus that can affect certain oak trees. If the buyer is concerned about such matters, the buyer may have the trees and other plants inspected by a professional. Again, you can, if you're not sure of who, you can utilize our First Class Luxury Living, our database. I actually have an arborist that I really love because I live in Kingwood, and I have a beautiful oak tree, and I'm like really concerned about certain diseases because there's an oak tree not too far away that has a disease, and I really don't want that to happen to my tree. So they're called arborists, but I do have one that I really, really love that you can totally use. Noise. Let's move on. Noise. Surrounding properties are used for various purposes. All right. Some of the uses can cause noise. For example, airports, railways, highway, restaurant, bars, school, arenas, and construction. The buyer is encouraged to drive the property, review the area around the property at various times of day while you have it under contract. Definitely do that, and you definitely want to do it especially during the option period. So if you find out something, I say go during the weekend, go during the week, drive the neighborhood, go after it rains, go walk the property. You need to kind of know that, and if it's going to be a problem, you can back out during the option period. You know what I mean? So let's keep talking about expansive soil. So soil conditions vary greatly throughout Texas. Many soils will move, some more than others. This movement may many times affect the foundation of the home and building, and may cause cracks to appear in other parts of the building. Additionally, if a property is newly constructed, the concrete cure process may also cause the foundation of the building to move. Seasonal changes in moisture in the soil may cause foundation to move. The buyer should check with an inspector or other experts on previous methods to minimize the risk of such movement. FERPA, this is very, guys, important. The Foreign Investment of Real Estate Property Tax Act of 1980 may require that the buyer in certain transactions involving a seller who qualifies as a foreign person to withhold up to 15% of the amount realized by the seller, usually the sales price, for tax purposes. You heard that right. If your seller is a foreign person, you, the buyer, may have to pay up to 15% of the sales price for their taxes. So you want to be very careful when as working as a buyer's agent to make sure that the person selling the property is not a FERPA. If they are a FERPA, all you have to do is just make sure you let the seller's agent know. And you guys, everything with money can be fixed, so you make sure that maybe you decrease the sales price by a certain percentage because you know this is going to happen. All right. Let's keep going. A foreign person is defined as a non-resident alien individual, foreign company that has not made an election under Section 897 of the Internal Revenue Code to be treated as a domestic corporation, or a foreign person, trust, or estate. The definition does not include a resident resident alien individual. A seller should notify the buyer within the sell. The seller should notify the buyer whether the seller is a foreign person, as defined by federal law. If the seller is unsure whether he or she qualifies as a foreign person, the seller should consult a tax professional or attorney. They usually know, but if they don't, there you go, tax professional or attorney. All right, let's talk about flood hazard. We kind of flood hazard, floodway, and flood insurance. Many properties are in flood hazard zones. Lenders who make loans on property located in flood hazard areas typically require the owner to maintain flood insurance. Additionally, some properties may lie in floodways. Texas Realtors publishes a form titled Information About Flood Hazard Zone Area TREC 1414, which I'm sorry, I keep saying Trek. TRX 1414, which discusses flood areas and floodways in more detail. We do have a video about that. If you want more information, go over there. The buyer is encouraged to buy flood insurance regardless of whether the property is in a high, moderate, or low risk area. All right. Also, historical or conservation districts. There are properties located in historical or conservation districts may have restrictions on the use and architecture of the property. Local governments may create historical or conservation districts for the preservation of certain architectural appeal. A property owner may or may not be aware of the property is located in such a district. If the the buyer is concerned whether the property is located in such a district, contact the local government for special information. Guys, they could be very picky on what they want. Like, you might want to paint your house, or if you're in a conservation district, you just can't do what you want to the exterior. Sometimes you have to get permission. So it's very important to know if you're in one of those areas. I'm pretty sure Galveston area, if you go down there, you see kind of looks like it's very cute, but being able to update it, you have to sometimes stick with the same genre of that year, could be expensive, so just if you have any questions about if you're located, there you go. Here is now on to the next thing: inspection, repairs, and walkthrough. Inspection. Look, the buyer is encouraged to have the property inspected by a licensed inspector. The buyer should have the inspection completed during the option period. Now, the buyer should accompany the inspector during the inspection and ask the inspector any questions. Brokers and agents do not possess any special knowledge, skills, or expertise concerning inspections or repairs. So if the buyer requests names of inspectors or repair professionals from an agent, the buyer should note that the agent is not making any representation or warranty as to the ability or workmanship of the inspector or the repair professional. Let's talk about repairs. The buyer and seller should resolve in writing any obligation, any timing of obligation to complete repairs the buyer may request before option period expires. Guys, everything must be in writing. If they say, "Oh, I'm going to leave this for you," great. You go and get a document. You make sure it's in writing. Get a non-realty item addendum if it's non-realty, or if it is, call an amendment, whatever. Everything that is said needs to be in writing, on a form, in a contract. Not, I got in a text message. Absolutely not. It needs to be in added to the contract via an amendment or an addendum, okay? Walkthrough. Before closing of the property, before closing of the sale of the property, the buyer should walk through the property and verify any repairs, and all repairs are completed. If the condition of the property does not satisfy the contractual provisions, the buyer should notify the buyer's agent before closing, okay? Mandatory ownership. That's talking about HOA. An owner association may require property owners to be a member. The buyer may obtain subdivision information, which is the restrictions applying to the subdivision, the bylaws, rules, and the owners association and other resale certificate. The buyer may be required to pay for the subdivision information unless otherwise negotiated in the contract. Now, if membership in the owners association is required, the buyer will probably be obligated to pay periodic dues or assessments. Listen, failure to pay such dues could result in a lien and foreclosure on the property. HOAs don't play. But I like HOAs. They make sure people are doing what they need to do and maintain the value of the properties in the neighborhood. All right, let's get to the next thing. That's just my opinion. But mineral interest. Determining who owns a mineral interest under a property, for example, rights to oil and gas interests, normally requires an expert to review the chain of title to the property. Many times the mineral interest may have been severed from the property and may be owned by persons other than the seller. Contact form commonly used for Texas providing seller's interest in the mineral. Like, this is the form you use if the seller does have interest in the mineral rights and conveyed to the buyer as a property owner. However, a seller may wish to retain all or part of their mineral rights. Texas Form Realtors publishes a form titled Information About Mineral Causes Contract Form TXR 25-9, which discusses the issue in more detail. All right, Multiple Listing Service, aka MLS, is a database and cooperative tool between brokers. Agents who use the MLS must comply with the MLS rules. The listing agent is required to timely report the current status of a listing, including when the property is sold or leased or is no longer available, as well as a sales price. Subscribers, other brokers, agents, appraisers, and other real estate professionals and appraisal districts have access to this information for market evaluation purposes. Much of the information in the MLS, such as square footage, assessed value, taxes, school boundaries, and year built, is obtained from different sources such as county appraisal district, appraisers, or builders. Listen, the broker or agents who provide the information from the MLS does not verify the accuracy of the information. The buyer should independently verify the information in MLS and not rely on this information. I see this a lot when people are measuring bedrooms, the size of a room. MLS really doesn't even allow us to get that detail. Like, oh, this house is it's 2/4 of an inch wide by this. We can't even get that detail. So it's very much so rounded up. So if that's important to your clients, they need to go in there with their tape measure and get to measuring. All right, let's talk about permits. Permits may be required to construct, alters, repairs, or other improvements. Guys, even if you think you're not, some people think, oh, I'm not an HOA, so I can do what I want. Absolutely not. You might be in the city and you might want to build a pool. You still need to pull permits from the city, the county, whatever. There are people that, there's still permits there. So the buyer is encouraged to contact the local government to verify that all required permits have been obtained, and this may impact future plans for the property. So if you're buying something and you're like, hey, I want to put in a pool, I'm not an HOA, so I don't have to deal with them, but you think you can, or build a pond. I had someone build a pond on their acreage out in the middle of the where they were, but then they were in the city of Harris County, and they have rules that got, because you're messing with the water flow. So there's rules about building ponds and stuff like that. So you have to check and make sure. And if they find out about it, you can be fined. So it's not like you can, oh, it's my land. Nope. It's not yours. They will find out, and once they find out, it will lay on whoever the owner is. So even when you're dealing with, and this is very important because I had an issue where my clients purchased a property that had been completely rehabbed. They built a pond, they built a berm, and after we closed, the city puts a notice on my client's door, and guess who has to comply with it? My clients. Thank God we weren't too far beyond. But even after, you'll learn too on the contract, even if it's closed, if we weren't disclosed of that information, the seller could have been liable and could have been sued as well. So we got in touch with the seller, let them know, hey, did you pull permits for this and stuff like that? And they were like, oh no, but we'll take care of it. But what if those people did not respond back and they were gone or something happened? My client would have been completely liable to make all the changes and pay all for everything. It was crazy. Anyway, so you may have permits even if you're not in the city, even if you're not in the HOA, even in the county, in the country, there still may be permits that you might have to get from the local government, okay? Possession. Most contracts provide that the seller will be delivering possession to the property at the time of closing and funding, meaning all the paperwork is signed and money is put in people's account, or according to a temporary residential lease or other written lease required by the parties. There may be a short delay between closing and actual funding, especially if the buyer is obtaining funding from a lender. The buyer needs to verify with the lender if the loan will fund on the day of closing. The buyer should also take the potential delay in account when planning to move into the property and possession of the buyer before sell. And any possession of the buyer before the sale closes and funded, or by the seller after the sale has closed and funded, must be authorized buyer written lease. Bottom line, y'all. Two things I can tell you about this. Well, a lot. Number one, when you're getting set to close, I know on the contract has a closing date, but you need to let you know that is a preliminary closing date. That's our target. But if it's, the money's not in the account and or all the documents have not been signed, then these people cannot access. If you're doing with a closing and funding, they do not have any legal obligation to access the property until that money gets to those people's account. So it's really, I always have my buyers say, let's first of all, we make sure we don't have any closings set on a Friday. I usually try to have it on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, because they're not open on Saturday, Sunday. Or hear about this: what if you closed on a Friday and the last person signed at 4 o'clock because title keeps bank hours, and that's too late for the money to transfer. So now your clients are sitting out at homeless with their moving truck in the parking lot because they don't have keys until Monday. And what if Monday's a holiday? So that's Thursday. So it's always best to close on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. That way, if anything falls or happens, it can be taken care of within a few days during that week, so we could possibly close and have these people moving and doing what they need to do by the weekend. Okay. Also set expectations and let your clients know, even though I know this says this is closing date, things happen, guys. You got so many moving parts, lenders, everybody's verifying the person, they're verifying the house, things come up. We have sometimes there's some things you don't have control of, and it's just what it is. So don't have them set in stone. This is the closing date. I ordered this and I got to be moved in by this. I get that. But if that's the case, you guys better stay on top of the lenders, the title company, and make sure weekly you're making sure you guys are set to close. But I would always just push, let them know, hey, this is jotted in pencil, okay? Because it could change. Also, when it comes to possession, temporary residential leases, I want you to be very, very careful with these. I highly recommend against them if you can, because anything can happen. Temporary residential lease, that could be the buyer moves in 90 days or less prior to the closing. Well, if you allow them to move in 90 days before the closing, and let's say, for example, they start buying furniture and stuff like that, and because the lender can pull their credit up until closing, and they pull the credit and say, well, it's dropped, so we're not going to give you the money. Now you have these people living in your house. They're not going to be able to buy the house because they lost the financing. What do? You're kind of, SOL. And then there's some cases where insurance providers they don't like that stuff. So it could really lead to a big economical loss. Okay. You'll see a lot of that written even in our 1-4 contract or your contracts about temporary residential leases. I also saw this one poor sweet girl in California. Those houses in California are nice and expensive. She spent $1.3 million on a property, bought her dream home. The seller, he said that he didn't have any money to move or something to exit. I don't know what that was about, but he asked for a temporary residential lease, meaning that they're going to close, he's going to get his money, and then she gave him maybe a week or two to get out. I don't know what it was or the time frame, but it was less than 90 days he had to get out. Well, guess what? He did not get out in the time he said he would. COVID took place, and all of a sudden he was locked in. So he was able to stay there, and well, not able to. He was kind of a tenant in sufferance, but he was staying there. And what could she do but fight it? And she had to fight it legally. And while she's fighting this legally and everything, guess what? She's having to pay her mortgage. That didn't stop her from having to pay her mortgage. So it really, and she had to have a place to stay of her own. So she's paying a mortgage, on a house she's not at, and then also having to pay for an attorney and also a place to stay where she needs, so she can rest her head at night. What a mess, guys. This can be a mess. So be very careful. If you do a temporary residential lease, please let me know or understand the consequences of what can happen. But at that particular point, you, the agent, you out. You letting them know their risk of doing this. They understand, they sign it. Unfortunately, yeah. But I kindly recommend against that. All right, next thing, property insurance. Promptly after entering a contract to buy a property and before option period expires, the buyer should contact the insurance agent to determine availability and affordability of property insurance as well as flood insurance. Since we're talking about this, what we should do as soon as we get under contract, we're going to recommend the following: general home inspection, HVAC inspection, pest and wood-eating insects inspection. If there's a pool, you may want to get a pool inspection. If there is a well and septic, you want to get that bad boy inspected. Also, you're going to, last but certainly not least, they need to be out getting insurance quotes, which is what they're talking about here. That way, during the option period, you find something that we don't like, can't live with, can't negotiate out of, and we want out, you can get out and get your earnest money back, right? All right, let's keep going. There are numerous variables that insurance companies will evaluate when offering insurance at certain coverage levels and at certain prices. Most lenders require the property be insured at an amount not less than the loan amount. The failure to obtain property insurance before closing may delay the transaction or cause it to end. The Texas Realtors publishes a document, Information About Property Insurance for a Buyer or Seller, which discusses property insurance in more detail. If you guys want to know, we have a video about that one as well. All right, property value. The real estate market is cycling. Oh, this is when I put my Madam Cleo hat on. I let people know, listen, the real estate market is cycling and current property values may fluctuate. Brokers and agents cannot guarantee future market conditions or property value. Why? Because I ain't Madam Cleo. If I could read the future, baby, I probably wouldn't be doing this right now. The ultimate decision on the price and terms a buyer is willing to buy and a seller is willing to sell for a specific property rests solely with the buyer and the seller. And that's it. It's crazy. I've even had people just call my phone. Is this a good deal? I can only give you some opinions and things, but at the end of the day, I would hate for you. I am Madam Cleo, right? Because there's outside forces that take place, that may or may, that affect things. So at the end of the day, property value is what a buyer is willing to buy and what the seller is willing to accept. It lies solely between them. And I just represent them and help them through it, but they make the decision on what they're willing to buy it for and what they're willing to sell it for. All right, residential service contracts. This is AKA a home warranty. So a residential service contract is a product under which a residential service company, for an annual fee, agrees to repair or replace certain equipment or items in a property. For example, covered appliances, air conditioner and heating systems, and plumbing systems. Co-payments typically apply to most service calls. If the buyer requests names of residential service companies from an agent, the buyer should note the agent is not making any representation or warranties about the service company, guys. And also, if you give any referrals, you're always going to give a minimum 3, all right? Restrictions on properties near an international border. Beware that, again, guys, this might not be your case, but it says general information. So we're just going to let them all know the general information, right? Beware that in certain counties located near international borders, Texas law may prohibit the sale of property lacking required water and sewer services. Even if a sale of such property is permitted, a buyer may face additional costs or restrictions under Texas law due to a lack of basic infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, and drainage. Texas Realtors published a form titled Information Regarding Property Near International Borders, TRX 2519. If you are selling a property and you are near that, this is a required for you to give to your client. Which um, which provide more information. Brokers and agents cannot guarantee that a seller of property is permitted under Texas law or otherwise give legal advice. Consult an attorney. Okay. All right, let's keep it moving. School boundaries, because we love the kids, right? I find this is very important to my clients because they understand, like most of the clients understand that schools are so important. But anyway, let's keep going. School boundaries may change and are at times difficult to determine. The school boundaries that an agent may provide or that may be provided through multiple listing services are only mapped from estimated sources. The buyer is encouraged to verify with the school district which schools residents in the school will be attending. As most of my parents, they usually will get the phone numbers, call the school, go up there. You know what I mean? So it's going to be your responsibility to make sure. And also because we're building so many new developments are coming in. They're having so many new kids and they're growing. So they are sometimes changing the maps of the school boundaries. I say, very important for you to call either call the district and see which school your kids are going to be assigned to make sure, we're in retrospect to that property that you're purchasing. Okay. All right. We're on page 4. We got a few more, not too much more, but a lot of information that you as an agent, you're looking out for and they should know too. Septic tanks and on-site sewer facilities. Many properties have septic tanks and on-site sewer facilities. There are several types of such systems. Special maintenance requirements may apply to certain systems. Please refer to documents titled Information on On-Site Sewer Facilities for more information. The buyer should also determine if the county requires any registration or other actions to begin using the septic system or on-site sewer facility. So if there's a septic or on-site sewer facility, this form is required with your contract. Another thing, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we're not the first humans to hit planet Earth. So a lot of these homes are older, or maybe they might be newer, but that doesn't stop them from maybe having a septic tank on the premises. You want to know where those are located. You know what I mean? But I've had people like, well, I'm in the city. Doesn't mean you might. Then I know a lot of people that are tied up to city well and drained, but they also have a septic system, which is awesome because it was put in years ago. But they might utilize the septic. They can utilize it, and they need to talk to the city to get permission. But I have some of them that use the septic just to water their grass or whatever. You know what I mean? It's pretty cool. Anyway, let's keep going. Sex offenders and criminal activity. Neither a seller or the seller's agent of a residential property has a duty to disclose any information about registered sex offenders. If the buyer is concerned about sexual offenders who may reside in the area, you want to make sure to access. There's lots of places you can access it, but this is the main one: https public site.dps.texas.gov/sexoffenderregistry.com. Contact the local police department to obtain information about any criminal activity in the area. All right, next, square footage. If the purchase, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but if the purchase price is based on the size of the property, building, and structure, the buyer should have any information the buyer receives about the square footage independently verified. Square footage information comes from other sources such as appraisal district, appraisers, and builders. Such information is only an estimate. The actual size, square footage may vary. So this happens a lot with new construction. Well, they'll say, oh, the house is this big. Well, things change. I mean, guys, it's human hands. Sometimes it may be off a little bit or they might change the floor plan a little bit, list square footage. But if that is super important to your client, you want to make sure that when the appraiser happens, that you look at what the appraiser is saying that the livable square footage is, okay? So that's important to them. They want to make sure it's verified by other sources, which the main person, if you got a loan, is going to be that appraiser. All right. statutory tax districts. The property may be located in a utility or other statutory created district, providing water, sewer, drainage, or other flood control facilities and services. For example, multiple utility districts, aka a MUD, water improvement districts, or a public improvement district. The buyer is likely to receive prescribed notices when buying a property in such a district. If you're going under contract with a property in a MUD or a water improvement district or a PID, the seller is responsible for giving you a notice, letting you know this, so that it's going to be included in your contract. Surveillance. Beware that when previewing properties, a seller may record or otherwise electronically monitor a buyer without the buyer knowledge or consent. A buyer might photograph or otherwise record the property without the seller's knowledge or consent. The party should consult an attorney before recording or photographing another person's property. Okay? Watch what you say when you're in someone's house. If you can, you might want to, if you want to get permission before, have your agent text the other agent so they can have in writing that they give you permission to do so. But people do it all the time. Oh, I like this snap. Well, we're just giving you forewarning, not responsible for it, but hey, people might be looking at you and listening to you, and you might be vice versa, taking photos of people's property or recording. Be careful of doing that, okay? Again, the party should consult an attorney before recording or photographing another person's property. Survey. A survey identifies the locations of boundaries, major improvements, fence line, drives, encroachments, easements, and other items on the property. The buyer should obtain a survey early enough in the transaction to help the buyers identify any encroachments, encumbrances to title, or restrictions. The contract will typically contain a provision which identifies who's responsible for providing a survey and the rights to object to encumbrances to title disclosed in the survey. Let's talk about synthetic stucco. This is really big, like in the 90s. I feel like people are doing stucco. But now you kind of see the repercussions of it. Okay, so synthetic stucco, sometimes known as EIFS, is an interior siding product that was placed on some properties in the recent past. If the product was not properly installed, it had been known to cause damage to the actual structure, such as wood rot and moisture. If the property has synthetic stucco, the buyer should ask the inspector to carefully inspect the siding and answer any questions. Talk to the inspector. All right, let's keep going. Tax proration. Typically, a buyer and seller agree to prorate taxes through the closing date. Property taxes are due and payable at the end of each calendar year. The escrow agent will estimate at closing the taxes for the current year. If the seller is qualified for tax exemption, for example, homestead, agricultural, or other over 65 exemptions, for example, such exemptions may or may not apply after closing. After closing, the taxes may increase because the exemption may no longer apply. When buying a new construction, the taxes at closing may prorate based on the land value and will later increase when the appraisal district includes the value of the new improvement of the house you built. The actual taxes due, therefore, at the end of the year in subsequent years may be different from the estimation used at closing. Title companies try to do a good job of making sure they don't, make sure of this, but you need to be aware of that if you do see a difference. Especially, I see it when home over 65 exemptions, they do change, okay? But the title company usually does a good job of doing estimates. Termination option, aka the option period. All right. Most forms contain a option clause which provide the buyer with the unrestricted right to terminate the contract, aka your option period, which in our case you do have to pay for, and the money, in order for you to have option period, needs to be turned to the title company within 3 days. Most buyers choose to buy the termination option. The buyers will be required to pay for the termination option in advance. The option fee is negotiable. Most buyers will conduct many of their reviews, inspection, and other due diligence during the option period. The buyer must strict, well, sorry, must be strictly compliant with the time prescribed under this option. The option period is not suspended or extended if the buyer and the seller negotiate repairs or amendments. If the buyer wants to extend the option period, the buyer renegotiate must negotiate an extension separately in a form, obtain extension in writing, and pay an additional fee for the extension. The buyer should not rely on oral extensions. Also, you need to pay some form of money. There's no thing as a free option period. At minimum $1. You got to put something down. Let's keep going. Tidal waters. If the property adjoins any of the state tidal waters, the seller will be provided the buyer with a prescribed notice addendum for coastal area notice. Boundaries of property located in such waters may change and building restrictions will apply. If the property is located seaward of the Gulf intracoastal waters, meaning on the beach, the seller will provide the buyer with a prescribed notice addenda for property located seaward of Gulf intracoastal way. I want to show you something. How do you know you're in a coastal area or on the beach? If you pull up the property, I'm just going to pull up any property right now for just sake of purposes. You pull up property, if you go to flood map, and if you see you're in the blue, you're in a coastal area, okay? This property is not in the blue. It's not in a coastal area. But if I was to zoom out, let's go to the coast, because that's Lake Houston. Let's go to the coast. Go by the water. Okay, here we go. So a lot of these properties on the beach, you're buying something here, more than likely there's a coastal area. Anyway, blue, coastal area. It'll say at the very top, your coastal area, need that form, or it'll say coastal area, blue, you're in a coastal area. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me move back to where we were so we can finish this. But if you are, there are forms for it. So there's one for if you're in a coastal area, and there's another one if you're in a coastal area and on the beach. There's two forms, notices that you have is required with the contract if the property is located in such a place. All right, let's keep going. Title insurance or abstract of title. The buyer should obtain a title insurance policy or have an abstract of title coverage for the property examined by an attorney. If the buyer obtains a title insurance policy, the buyer should have the commitment of title insurance reviewed by an attorney not later than the time required under the contract. Utilities. The buyer should evaluate what utilities the buyer will require and check to be sure that the utilities are available in the area. Suits the buyer's needs. I've had a few clients that were like techies, where they wanted certain speed of internet, and they wanted the underground, the new, I forgot what it's called, but they want a certain utility so they can get internet fast. It was important to them, so when we found a property, they were always looking to make sure what utilities were available, to make sure it fit their needs. Some structures may or may not have utilities and electrical facilities to support many modern appliances or equipments. So you want to be careful of that. I know, just for example, my parents-in-law, they make their own electricity. So if I was to sell their property and somebody's like, well, I want to run this and run that, you're not going to be able to do that on my parents' grid. So you just have to understand what are the utilities and things that you need and what's available in that area at that property. Water level fluctuations. State law requires that sellers to notify buyers of properties that adjoin a lake, reservoir, or other impoundments of water with storage capacity levels of 500 square feet in the normal operating levels, and the water levels may fluctuate. The buyer and seller can find a list of lakes and reservoirs with at least 500 acres of square feet storage capacity by accessing https I think that's Texas ALMANAC UC.com. Topics, environmental lakes, blah, blah, blah. That's where you can go and get that. um, Water wells. If the property has a water well, the buyer should have the lender. Sorry, if the buyer, sorry, if the property has a water well, the buyer should have, and the lender may require the equipment be inspected and water tested. You want to make sure to do this during the option period. The buyer should also determine if the county requires any registration or other actions to be used using the water well. Sometimes I want to talk to them, but just to give you an example, I do know a few clients that have wells, and they're only allowed to use so much water within a year. They have and if they go over that allotted amount, then they have to pay a difference. So you do need to talk to the county and see if there are any requirements, restrictions. They may test the water, make sure, just a lot of things, right? Wire fraud. Criminals are targeting real estate transactions by gaining access to electronic communications or sending emails that appear to be from real estate agents, title companies, lenders, and other trusted sources. You want to refrain from transmitting personal information such as bank account information or other financial information via unsecured email or other electronic communications. If the buyer receives an electronic communication regarding wiring instructions, even if the communication appears to come from a legitimate source, the buyer should verify the authenticity prior to transferring funds via in-person or phone call using a recognizable phone number that is not found in the communication, okay? So, and this is so important. We have several forms for the, like, just to kind of let you know. Well, wonderful. So this form was provided by, you're going to put First Class Luxury Living. You're going to put your agent. It says broker's associate, so it's going to be the agent's name, you, the agent, and you're going to have assign these to your clients. But that is it. Sorry. That is it when it comes to general home information notice that you're going to give to your clients. Have any questions? Let me know.